Alrighty, y'all. If anybody felt like they needed some help with the 50 questions, the 50 essential questions for AP Micro, I figured that I would go over some of the highlights together, just in case you were having trouble. So let's take a look at some of these. To start out with, it's asking about Unit 1 and the production possibility curves. So I've drawn two out here to kind of answer number 1 and number 2 together. A straight line production possibility curve is going to represent a constant opportunity cost. Right, that if I have a 100-acre farm, I can make 100 acres of corn or 100 acres of potatoes. I could do 70 acres of one and 30 acres of the other, 50-50, any kind of combination there. The production possibility curve is going to be in a straight line because my opportunity cost is constant. Every time I grow an acre of one thing, I've got to give up an acre of something else. So anywhere on this line represents efficiency. I'll call this E. Right, so anywhere on this line would represent efficiency, whether I'm doing 100 acres of one, 100 acres of the other, 50-50, 70-30. But if I only grew 50 acres of corn and 30 acres of potatoes, that would represent inefficiency. Something went wrong. I wasn't able to use all my land appropriately. Maybe my irrigation system busted. Maybe my workers went on strike. Now, if we're looking at this production possibility curve shifting outwards, something would need to change about my factors of production. Namely, in this case, land. I would need more land in order to be able to grow more combinations of them. So growth would be represented by this curve shifting outwards. Now, if we're looking at the difference between a PPC that's in a straight line and one that's bowed outwards, the straight line represents the constant opportunity cost. The bowed out one represents an increasing opportunity cost. And that would be most things. Right, the corn and the potatoes share the same factors of production: irrigation systems, fertilizer, land. But if we're looking at making planes versus houses, those would need different factors of production. So the more I make of one thing, it becomes increasingly difficult to make the other. Right? If I'm just producing houses, maybe I can produce 1,000 houses. But if I want to produce a plane, then I'm going to have to give up more and more and more of those houses because they're not sharing the same factors of production. It's becoming increasingly difficult to make those. If we're looking at output and input comparative advantage questions, let's remember that with the output, the opportunity cost goes over what I'm producing. So if I make one boat and I'm giving up 5 cars, then the opportunity cost is going over what I'm making. 5 cars over one boat is going to cost 5 cars. Now, if we're looking at these input questions, we're measuring the input. For an input question, the opportunity cost goes under what we're producing. So let's say that it takes me 10 hours to make a car and 100 hours to make a house. Right? So if I'm making the house, the opportunity cost, or if I'm making a car, the opportunity cost is going to be the house. If I make the house, the opportunity cost is going to be the car. The opportunity cost for an input question is going to go under what we're producing. And flipping the numerator and denominator essentially makes it an output question. So if I'm doing the opportunity cost here, the opportunity cost of the houses would be the cars. And so I'm going to put that underneath what I'm producing, which is the cars. So in that case, if I produce one car, I'm going to have to give up 1/10 of a house, and vice versa. But if I produce one house, I can make 10 cars during that time period. So for an input question, the opportunity cost goes under what we're producing. For the output question, the opportunity cost goes over what we're producing. Explain how to determine if a country has a comparative advantage. If they have a lower per unit opportunity cost. So if we're looking at the U.S., right, we have an absolute advantage in producing oil. We can make more oil than any other country in the world, but we don't have the comparative advantage. By making oil, we can't produce guns or technology or medicine. We've got these other options that we could produce. If you look at a lot of Middle Eastern countries, oil is like 90% of their economy. That by producing oil, they're not really giving up a lot else. So even though we have the absolute advantage, they would have the comparative advantage because their opportunity cost is lower to produce this. If we're looking at explicit costs and implicit costs, explicit costs are out-of-pocket, direct out-of-pocket expenses. So if I had a restaurant, that would be the cost of hiring workers, or the cost of my ingredients, or the cost of my tools. Implicit costs are the non-tangible, costs. It'd be time or your opportunity cost. And that's equally important, right? That when I decided to do my doctorate program, it wasn't just the tuition that I was considering, it was also these implicit costs, the time that it would take in order to produce that. I had to give up coaching soccer in order to be able to do it, less time with my family. Those would be the implicit costs. All right, if we're looking at this utility maximizing rule, right, the marginal utility of one good per dollar equaling the marginal utility per dollar of the other good, this utility maximizing rule, it's this idea that your dollars are evenly spread to maximize utility. So dollars are evenly spread. And the idea behind this is of this diminishing returns, right? That if you go to see a movie once, your utility of it's going to be high. The price of the movie isn't going to change, though. Every time you see the movie beyond that, your marginal utility per dollar is going to go down. But if you can use that money or the rest of that money to go to the flip zone or something like that, well, now you're balancing that out. What's the ideal utility between these, right? So the more, like, let's say I have $50 and I want to have a cool afternoon, I can go see movies or I could go ride go-karts. Right? I shouldn't just do the movies, all afternoon. Maybe a combination of those two is what would balance out the best. All right, so a market demand curve is downward sloping. The main reason is because of the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. If price is high, people are buying less goods. If prices are low, people are buying more goods. And the reasoning behind this is kind of three things. First off, this income effect, right? If we're looking at this demand curve, downward sloping, at price and quantity. At a high price, this good is going to eat up more of my income, and so I'm less willing to buy it. At a lower price, it's not going to have as big of an impact on my income, right? If I buy a McDouble from McDonald's, that's a tiny fraction of my paycheck, whereas buying a new car would be a pretty big chunk of that paycheck. So the income effect causes it to be downward sloping. The substitution effect, that if the price of a good is high, people are generally going to find substitutes to it. So if the housing market gets too expensive, if the price of houses go up too much, people are naturally going to start to rent more, and so our quantity demanded for houses will be low. If houses get cheaper, then people will buy more and rent less. And the last big reason would be the diminishing marginal utility. Right? If I'm looking at ice cream scoops or whatever, that first scoop of ice cream I'm willing to pay a lot of money for. But the more scoops I get, the less and less I'm willing to buy that good. So I'm only going to be willing to buy it if the price goes down. And that's why a lot of clothing stores will do like buy one, get one half off or things like that. Explain why an increase in the price of a good does not change the demand for the good. It's because the demand is represented by this whole curve. The different prices and how much we're buying at each price. So if the price changes, like if the good goes on sale, our demand hasn't changed, how much we like or want or need the product, but the quantity demanded would change. All right, explain why the total revenue test can't be used to determine elasticity of supply. So the total revenue test says that if the price of a good goes up and the total revenue goes up, then there's an inelastic demand, right? That we're willing to buy that good even at a higher price. All right, so it's saying that if price goes up, total revenue goes up. If price goes down, total revenue goes down. For elasticity of supply, it doesn't work because if price goes up, quantity supplied is always going to go up, no matter what, right? If businesses can make a bigger profit, they're willing to supply more of that good. Explain why the elasticity is not constant as you go along a downward sloping demand curve. It's because lower prices affect less of your income. So if the cost of a car were to double from $10,000 to $20,000, that's going to make me think about whether I want to buy that car. If the price of a McDouble doubles from $2 to $4, that's not going to really, make me lose sleep at night, right? So the lower the price is, the less of that income effect, the less it's going to impact my demand for the good. And so it's not whether a good is elastic or inelastic. All goods are a combination, right? That Daraprim drug, they raised the price from $7 to $7.50, but they had to stop somewhere. They couldn't raise it to 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 because eventually people would stop buying it. Explain why a price below the equilibrium price causes a shortage. It's because, if we're looking at supply and demand here, and the equilibrium price being $3 for this good, right? If we set the price at $1, businesses are less willing to provide that good, but people are willing to buy more of the good. If demand is greater than supply, that would cause us a shortage. Explain why either price or quantity are indeterminate when both demand and supply changes. It's because both are changing twice. One is going to go in the same direction twice. And one is not. So let's say that we're looking at this case right here. So we've got supply, we've got demand. Let's say that our demand goes up and our supply goes up as well. So we've got the new equilibrium price, or the new equilibrium here and the old equilibrium here. Now the quantity definitely increased because when the demand went up, the quantity went up. When the supply went up, the quantity went up again. So it went up twice. So the quantity definitely increased. But if we're looking at the price went up when the demand went up, and then it went back down when the supply increased. So we would say that it's indeterminate. Now explain why a price ceiling above the equilibrium price is not binding. It's because people will keep charging the equilibrium price. So if we're looking at this one right here, so let's say that we're looking at the price of a box of cereal. If the government sets a price ceiling at $5, that's not going to influence the companies. They're going to keep charging $3 for it because that's where they're making the most money. So that price ceiling to be binding would need to be beneath the equilibrium price. Explain why the change in the price of after an excise tax is not equal to the amount of the tax. And that's what we see happening with the tariffs right now. And that's because buyers and sellers are both paying part of it. So whenever Honda sends us over a car right now, we add a 10% tariff onto it, right? Let's say that the price of it goes up by $2,000. So Honda's the one paying that tax, but as a response, they're having to they're going to have to raise their prices in order to recoup those losses. So what ends up happening is that buyers and sellers both pay a fraction of that tax, and who's going to pay that tax comes down to the elasticity of the product. So if we're looking at cigarettes, right, a really inelastic demand for them, if we raise an excise tax by $2 onto those cigarettes, the consumers are the ones that are going to be paying that tax, right? Marlboro knows they can raise their prices, and people are going to keep buying that product. All right, explain why a tax placed on a good with an inelastic demand results in less dead weight loss than a tax placed on a good with elastic demand. That's kind of what I was just getting at there with the Marlboro cigarettes. If we want to draw it out here, so we've got the supply curve. Let's say that our demand is inelastic. It's pretty vertical. That even a big change in price isn't going to drastically impact the quantity. So if we raise this excise tax and the supply curve shifts upwards, all right, our demand isn't going to drastically change for that. Our dead weight loss would be a lot smaller than if there's an elastic demand. So the reason that there's not a lot of dead weight loss is because people keep buying the good. So the demand isn't changing very much, the quantity demanded doesn't drop very much, so our dead weight loss wouldn't be very large. Explain why importing goods at a lower price results in more total surplus. It's because the total quantity of goods is going up. So if we're looking at our supply curve, demand curve, if we're not trading with other goods, this is where we're producing at P1 right here in Q1. But if we're looking at this idea of a world price, I'm going to call it WP, right? If we can buy it cheaper from other places, that's what we're going to buy, right? So before, our consumer surplus is just this area right here, the distance between the most we would pay and what we're actually paying. Now our consumer surplus is all of this right here because we're able to get it a lot cheaper than we were before. Now the producer surplus is smaller, but our total surplus, because we're going all the way out to here right now, is bigger. All right, I'll put a pause on this, and then we'll take a look at 3 and 4, and then we'll do 5 and 6 to finish up.